ending then. All right. So don't ask me about the ending, okay? How far are you? Where are you in the book? Okay, what's happening there?
And then we're in the part that he's walking and walking and walking.
Doesn't sound like fun, does it? Okay.
And somebody called his name, and he's the uncle.
Oh, okay, so he's just met up with Uncle. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's one of the, I mean, there's not very many happy moments in the story, right? But that's one of the happy moments. So you guys have questions?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll get as many as we can.
When did you meet Salva?
When did I meet Salva? I probably met Salva in 2005. My husband met Salva first. My husband at the time was a newspaper reporter. Newspaper reporters get a ton of press releases. That's all kinds of people and organizations sending them news about different stuff and wanting the reporter to come cover the news like you see on television. Well, my husband's not a television reporter. He was a newspaper reporter. But he got this press release that was this young man who was trying to start an organization to bring clean water to people who live in the south part of Sudan. So my husband went to that event, and he met Salva. He came home and he said to me, I met somebody really interesting, and I think you should meet him because he was really cool. So eventually I did meet Salva. We all got to be friends. And as you already know from starting reading the book, his story just blew me away. I just could not believe all the stuff that happened to him starting when he was 11 years old. So I was telling everybody I knew about him. I would say, I met this guy, I got to tell you about him. I told all my friends, you know. Then I ran out of people I knew, so I started telling people I didn't know. Like I'd be in line at the CVS, and I'd turn around and say, I know you don't know me, but I have to tell you about this guy. It was kind of weird, but that is how impressive his story was. And I finally decided, oh, if I wrote his story, a whole bunch of people could meet Salva at once. So that's how I met him, and that's how I decided to write the book. So, yeah.
Do you still speak to Salva?
I do. Salva now lives in South Sudan, in Africa. He comes back to the United States 3 or 4 times a year. So whenever he comes back, I try to meet up with him. But he's really, really busy. So I don't often get to see him. I last saw him in June. He was back here and I had lunch with him. And we keep in touch by email. But the part of Sudan he lives in now doesn't have electricity. No electricity, no computer, right? So he only checks his email every 2 or 3 months. So I send him an email. I know he's not going to be able to check his email until he goes to a really big city that's about 200 miles away. So, yeah.
So how is he doing?
He's doing great. Here ago, they have some cars, no roads. So you got to just drive on the dirt wilderness, you know. So cars break down all the time because there's no roads, but they do have cars. He got married last year. He got married to a really nice lady named Rebecca, and they have a baby girl. So he's doing great. He's doing great. So.
Which one of your book is your favorite?
Which one of my books is my favorite? Okay, this is a great question. I have a true answer, but it's not a satisfying answer. Okay? I have a couple of answers. One answer is, all of my books have something about them that is my favorite. It would be like if you have brothers and sisters, and you asked your mom or dad, come on, which kid's your favorite? Come on, really? Which kid's right? Right. They always say, I have 2 kids. I have a son and a daughter. All right? I love them both very, very much. Some days, my son is giving me attitude. He's not listening. We're having a hard time. On those days, my daughter is my favorite. But other days, it's my daughter who's not listening. And on those days, my son is my favorite. The same thing with my books. Now this morning, you just heard me read, well, you just came in, just after I finished reading this book to a bunch of really little kids. While I'm reading that book, it's my favorite book. Right? And that's not a lie. I really feel like that. I love this book while I was reading it. But now, I'm with a different audience. I'm talking about A Long Walk to Water, which was an incredible experience for me to write. And it's my favorite book. See? So my favorite book changes.
Okay.
Okay, you can go again in a minute. All right?
Did you always want to become a writer? And what inspired you to become a writer?
I don't know that I always wanted to become a writer, but I was always writing, ever since I was really little. more important than that, I was always reading. Okay, now I want you to think a second about reading, all right? Is there a novel there without pictures? Just any old one. That's fine. I don't know what this is. Okay, right. If you look at this, this is a novel. I'm not talking about a picture book with pictures in it. But what you actually see is a white page and a bunch of little black squiggles. Right? This is just squiggle, 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 squiggle. Line after line of little black squiggles. But if you know how to read, you can look at those squiggles, and a few minutes later you can be laughing, or crying, or tense and scared, right? Just by looking at squiggles. That's almost like magic. That looking at squiggles can create emotion in us. Well, I realized that a long time ago, right when I was about your age. I thought to myself, that is what I want to do. I want to make people cry using just squiggles. Right? That's what I do. Make people laugh, make people cry. Well, you know, if you read something in a book, if you look at these squiggles and you start crying, nobody's pinched you or hurt you, right? It's just the squiggles that have made you cry. That is incredible. How does that even work? Right? It's so cool. That's why I think reading is like magic. So I loved to read when I was little. And I like to write, but reading was my favorite, and reading was what inspired me. I thought, I want to do that. I want to create those kinds of emotions just like that. All right, let's see. Here, I'm trying to get to everybody at least once, okay? Before we come back. Who's my favorite author and why? I love to read so much that I have hundreds of favorite authors. And if you go to my website, which is my name, LindaSuePark.com, you can click on a tab that says Reading. Some of my favorite authors are there. Not all of them, but I have lists of my favorite books and favorite authors on my website. Okay? Just too many for me to name right now. But one thing is sometimes related to that, I get asked what kind of book do I like? You know, do I like fantasy? Do I like adventure? Do I like historical or realistic or nonfiction? Or books for kids or books for adults or poetry or biography? You know, and my answer is yes. They're all my favorite. I will read any kind of book as long as it's good. That's my only criterion. Right? I don't have time to read a bad book, nobody does. But if it's a good book, I will read any kind of book. Okay, yes.
What made you write about Saba?
What made me write about Saba? Well, so far you've gotten a little hint of his story by reading the first 6 to 7 chapters, right? And it's going to become even more incredible.
Tell them that all the time, right?
Yeah. It's going to get even more incredible. So when I learned Saba's story, I just thought, I want other people to know about him because he is such an incredible, inspirational figure. I think about him every day. You know, I think about him every day, and I think, you know, I think he's just the greatest example of how one person can make a difference in the world. You know, you might just think you're one person, you're not famous, you're not rich. Saba wasn't any of those things. But he decided, you know what? I'm going to make the world a little bit better place. It's like, wow. You know, and that's what he went on to do. Just think if every single person did that. Every single person in the whole world said, I'm going to make the world a better place. Wow, I think we could fix a lot of stuff. Sorry? Yes. But like I said, you don't even have to do big things. There's ways to make the world a better place in little ways. You know? When you do something that makes your friend or your family or your mom or your teacher happy, you make the world a better place. And we can all do that. Okay, let's start over again. Yeah.
How do you meet Naya?
How did I meet Naya? Great question. I actually never met Naya. My husband did. My husband went to Africa with Saba. Okay? He saw all the stuff that Saba was doing. Okay? He went and lived in those little villages. He met many girls just like Naya. He interviewed them, he videotaped them, he recorded them, he took 600 pictures, he brought them all home. He told me about the girls like Naya. So Naya, I mean, if Saba were here, you could touch him and shake his hand and all that. Naya is not one individual person the way that Saba is. She's what's called a composite. I took information about all the girls that my husband had met and sort of squashed them into one girl, okay, and made a composite character, and that's Naya. Yeah.
You just said that your favorite book is No Walk for What happens if you make another book and it's even more interesting?
Oh, thank you. Well, A Long Walk to Water is not my first book. I have lots of other books, but that's the first book about Salva. I have not considered making another book about Salva, although that is a very interesting idea. Thanks for the idea. One thing is, when I wrote A Long Walk to Water, Salva was still living in America, so I got to interview him and talk to him all the time, and that's what gave me the information for the book, him telling me all his stories. It would be harder for me to write more of a book now about Salva because he lives so far away. But it's a possibility. You never know. Maybe there might be another book about Salva someday. But finish this one first, okay? Okay.
How old was Salva when you met him?
How old was Salva when I met him? Okay, let's see. He was 11 when he ran away from his village, okay? And I met him in 2005, so he was, let's see, he was born in 85. He was born in 1974, so he was almost 30 when I met him. He was almost 30. And now he's like 37? Yeah? The first book I wrote was a novel called Seesaw Girl. It's set in Korea, which is where my family is from. My family's, like my grandparents, they originally came from Korea. I was born here in the U.S., but my parents and grandparents were born in Korea. So I wrote a story about a girl living in Korea in ancient times, and then I wrote a book called The Kite Fighters, about boys living in Korea in ancient times. I wonder, let's see those on here. Let's see if we can grab a copy or two. Anything hard.